Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. The subject of today's session is the primary colors of personality. Artists tell us that although the range of colors is so wide, it is basically three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, which can be mixed in different proportions. And that is what gives us that astronomical range of personalities. And one way of looking at it in a simple way is that, you know, uh, Swami Sachidanand, who was the guru of Dr. D. Nornish, the famous cardiologist, used to say that human beings these days should be called human doings because they're obsessed with doing something, they're obsessed with work. Probably there's no other animal that is as obsessed as human beings are with work, and that is becoming more true today than ever before. These days, people think that unless they are busy 24 hours a day, they have not earned their bread. So this should get reflected also in the personalities. One extreme would be extreme laziness. And if at all this person moves and does something, it would be for wrong reasons. This is what we call tamas. And the other extreme would be someone who is driven by work and he does this work for the sake of himself, the self with a small s. That is to satisfy his own personal needs, desires, ambitions. This is what is rajas. And the third would be a person whose activity may be moderate, but it is driven by something higher than his individual self, something which indicates love and compassion for others. And that is the type of third person, and that is sattva. Now, the three types are in a way exemplified in the Ramayana. Kumbhakaran, who used to sleep a lot and would have to be given a lot of food to be driven to do something, is an epitome of tamas. Ravan, who was very active, uh, activity driven, and would do anything, including a difficult tapasya, to be able to uh, achieve power and prestige, he reflects rajas. Whereas the third brother, Vibhishan, he was sattvic in nature, driven by love and compassion and interested in doing the right thing. So that is what sattva is. Now let's go over these three basic elements, the three basic elements that constitute personality. And to some extent, all of us have each of these three in different proportions. And that is what gives us that wide range of personalities. So just as, in case of colors, we can mix them in different proportions and get an astronomical range of colors. It's in the same way that these three basic elements in the personality of a person, which are called the gunas, the way in which Prakriti manifests itself in the individual as a guna, uh, it is these three gunas mixed up in different proportions, combinations of in different proportions that gives us a wide range of personalities. Now let's go over these three elements one by one. Tamas is basically the principle of ignorance and inertia. And the basic nature of this person is laziness. He wants to do nothing as far as possible. And if at all he does something, it is something mechanical in nature, something which involves repetitive work, and does it in a perfunctory manner. If he finds that anything needs persistence, hard work, then he may leave it midway. And the result is that the product of his work is always shoddy, sloppy, and ill organized. The type of thinking that he has is that uh, he is unhappy because because life is unfair, society is unjust. So he's basically an unhappy person, but at the same time, nothing can really drive him to work because he always has a scapegoat available. Either the society is not fair, or life in general is not fair, or his fate is not proper, and that's what gives him some justification for behaving the way he does. But he is neither interested in improving himself nor improving his thinking, which is muddled and confused because of his ignorance. He doesn't want to remove this ignorance. He doesn't want to overcome laziness, but at the same time, he's happy as he is. Sometimes tamas may be camouflaged. For example, a person may be extremely active in the morning because he feels that if I finish all the work in the morning, then in the evening, I can do nothing. So actually, it is the uh, temptation of doing nothing in the evening that is making him look hardworking in the morning. Or another person may decide that I'll work very hard for 10 years so that I have earned enough and I don't have to work for the rest of my life. Now, these are different ways of expressing tamas. So the person will appear hardworking, but actually, he's basically dominated by tamas. And why has the divine planted this in us? The divine has planted this in us because some element of tamas also has a place in life. It gives stability and helps us establish a certain routine which we fall in love with. And if we look at it that way, that is a resistance to change, love for a certain routine, love for what is familiar, a little mistrust and fear of the unknown. We find that these are all things which all of us have to some extent, and these are also reflections of tamas. Uh, Let me just read a few lines from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. A slave of a fixed mass of absolute rules, it sees as law the habits of the world, it sees as truth the habits of the mind. So, this is in three lines a description of the tamasic nature. A slave of a fixed mass of absolute rules. He loves conventions, he loves rules, and because that has a certain fixity in it. Uh, in a way, societies also have a tamas when they pass through their age of convention, and that can last for centuries, as happened in the dark ages in Europe. And India also is stuck in the age of convention. Uh, it sees as law the habits of the world, it sees as truth the habits of the mind. Now let's move to the second element, and that is rajas. Rajas is the element of desire, passion, ambition, and this then determines the type of work that the person does. This person is not ignorant. His thinking is very clear. He knows what is right and wrong, but he doesn't want to do what is right if it will not serve his personal ambitions. So it's a sort of an unbridled pursuit of ambition, and that's what makes it sometimes unethical. So the person knows what is right or wrong, but he ignores that. So all his work is driven by his personal interests, by self interest, self in the narrow sense of his individual self. And even if he gives a gift, it is in the with the expectation that I'll get something more in return if I give this gift. Now, psychologists sometimes describe this type of personality as a type A personality, highly ambitious, high strung, egoistic, and uh, driven by ambition, uh, ambition for wealth, power, prestige, and therefore willing to work very hard, multitasking all the time, cutting down on sleep. Now, that is type A personality. Although type A personality has been correlated with several diseases like peptic ulcer and heart disease, further studies have shown that, in fact, it is some of the negative features of type A personality which are responsible. People who are hardworking and ambitious, but do not have those negative traits, do not show much of a risk for these diseases. Now, what are those negative features? Negative features like cynicism and hostility. Now, it is the cynicism and hostility that is much more closely related to the diseases like heart disease and peptic ulcer rather than ambition. So, ambition and hard work by themselves do not kill. It is the negativities which often get associated with these which are responsible for these diseases. Like tamas, rajas has also been planted in us by the divine with a purpose because the next step after stability, achieving stability, would be some type of activity. And any type of activity is better than no activity at all. And that is why rajas has been planted in us. However, uh, anything which is imperfect in us is capable of going towards perfection because being a manifestation of the divine, it can move towards that perfection of the divine. So rajas also can be improved upon, and that is what going towards sattva means. But before we go to sattva, let me again read a few lines from Savitri. Yet were its works not small and vain nor null. It nursed a portion of infinity's strength and could create the high things its fancy willed. Its passion caught what calm intelligence missed. So the works of Rajas are neither small nor vain nor null. So the great achievements of mankind are by and large because of this Rajas. Because without this passion, without this emotion behind, without this passionate involvement in what we are doing, there would be no great achievements because all great achievements are also involve some sacrifice, struggle, hardships, obstacles, and the person goes through all these because of passionate involvement of the Rajasic variety. Rajas is also required to some extent by all leaders and administrators because that is how they are able to get the work done, and that's how they are driven by that work, that energy which makes all that work and achievements possible. They are also, Rajas helps them take quick decisions. So these are all things which are to some extent desirable, so long as it is not unbridled Rajas. Yet were its works nor small and vain nor null, it nursed a portion of infinity's strength and could create the high things its fancy willed. So Rajas also has a certain portion, a certain fraction of infinity strength, the strength of the divine, and it could create the high things. So all the great achievements are the creation of Rajas. Its fancy willed, whatever it wished for, what it's imagined, whatever it desired, that it could do because of this element of kinetic activity, dynamism, which characterizes Rajas. Its passion caught what calm intelligence missed. So this passion is able to catch what calm intelligence, cool, considered, calculated thinking, that misses that element. And that's how some degree of rajas is perhaps necessary in ordinary worldly life. But then, uh, if it is unbridled, it is not only unethical, but even for the person who is uh, letting his rajas dominate without bringing any sattvic element in, finds that the initial feeling that ambition and activity and achievement, activity itself also gives great joy because joy is not there just in achievement, reaching the goal, but the pursuit also gives a great deal of satisfaction. So, this joy of effort, joy of activity, joy of having an ambition, and then finally the joy of achievement. All these are sweet to start with, but eventually bitter. That's what the Gita also tells us that the fruits of rajas are initially sweet, but eventually bitter. Why does that happen? Because sooner or later we realize that these are not the sources of lasting happiness. Because something which in itself cannot last cannot be the source of lasting happiness. And suffering does not spare a person because of all his achievements. All his achievements, all his contacts, all his things that he was proud of become totally useless in some situations. And when this person suffers, then what are his responses? One response could be that he tries to overcome this suffering, these difficulties, also through the same element of rajas. He turns to his contacts, he turns to all types of resources of which he was proud, he turns to all sorts of unethical means which he has been using in his work so far, and he tries to put them at work for fighting these problems, fighting this suffering. The second type of response can be that the person is disgusted, feels that I have been working so hard, I have done so much, and yet this is what has happened. Life is unfair. Probably there is nothing like God. He gets disgusted and becomes inactive. Tamas takes over. But then this is generally temporary. After some time, he returns to his native nature and once again engages in the same type of rajasic activity. Back to square one, the person has not really changed as a result of this experience. The third possible response is that the person feels that it is no use working like this for the sake of uh, wealth or power or prestige or position. And uh, I would be quite happy with some work which is not so lucrative. So after all, uh, I have tasted enough of it. It didn't bring me lasting happiness. I still have suffered and I have accumulated enough wealth. Now I don't need any more. So I'll turn to something else, something better than this. He may engage in social work or something like that. But then when he does that, again, it is for an egoistic satisfaction. So the basic nature has not changed, but now his ego is being pampered by something which is of a different type. And then what is the result? The result is that if he engages in social work with an organization, he starts finding faults with that organization. On the surface they look so good, but these are all the mistakes that they are making, these are all the wrong things that they are doing. He starts finding fault with them. The work type of work that he is doing, from that he starts expecting a lot. He thinks that the world will change as a result of this work, and when he finds that objective evaluation of the outcome, which has become the trend these days, shows that not much has changed, then he's disappointed and he feels, what's the use of all this? Might as well go back to my old life and at least make some more money, have the achievements which are highly visible. This is going really giving really no visible or tangible change. There are no tangible results. So why should I go on doing this type of work? So these can be the type of responses which still keep him basically unhappy, and when he does not get enough of egoistic satisfaction from this type of work. He may condescend to saying that at least I want that those people for whom I'm working, they should be grateful to me. And he finds that very often they are not only not grateful, they turn against him. And then he says, what is this? This world is a topsy-turvy world, and therefore I will not do this type of work. He forgets that that is the fate of all those who do something for the world. Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, hard is the world redeemer's task, cross is the payment that he receives for the crown. You know, obviously the reference to Jesus Christ, that he was a world redeemer, but then what is the payment that the society gave him? Cross for the crown, the kingdom of God. So for promising the kingdom of God, the cross is what he received. So that is the fate. So one should not expect that those people will be grateful to me. Even that should not be expected. So this person who is doing all this social work, basically for egoistic satisfaction, is generally disappointed, and because of all these reasons, finding that the worldly achievements did not bring him lasting happiness. When he turned away from worldly achievements and turned to social work, that did not give him enough satisfaction. The result is basically this person remains a discontented, unhappy person. And therefore, the fourth possibility is that if this person goes through some suffering and difficulties, he may turn more and more sattvic. This would be the most desirable outcome of this suffering. This would be the right way of using this opportunity that has been provided to him by going through some difficult phase in life. And if he does that, then this has been used well. Now let's turn to the third element in our personality, and that is sattva. Sattva is the element of knowledge and harmony. And this person is by nature loving, compassionate, contented, and happy. And what the work that he does is done in an ethical manner. He keeps in mind what is right and wrong. He has knowledge. So, like the Rajasic person, he's very clear about what is right and wrong. And then he has also the courage to do what is right, even if it involves a loss. And his thinking is uh, broad, full of love and compassion. And if he gives a gift, he gives it to the right person at the right time for the right reason. The pitfalls of sattva are firstly that it tends to get dominated by rajas and tamas, because most of us have all these three elements in us. The person may start some activity with all the right motives, purely sattvic motives, but then he starts seeing in it opportunities for wealth, opportunities for name and fame, opportunities for uh, getting awards and rewards, and he starts working towards those as well. He feels that, well, the good work is going on, I'll not let that stop, and he forgets that that good work in itself is not the end. That work has to be done as an instrument of the divine without any of these expectations. And what is happening is that what he started with a purely sattvic motive is now getting contaminated by the rajasic element, which was also there in the same person, because we have each of these three elements. Another thing that can happen is that he may get tired of this work. He may feel that, well, I have worked enough. I worked for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Now earn some rest. Now, when he feels that, it is this tamas which is taking over. He's capable of doing the work, but uh, he may he starts thinking of taking rest. He starts thinking of settling down for a more ordinary life with a mechanical routine, which is comfortable to him, uh, which is full of only what is familiar and what is convenient and easy. So here it is tamas taking over. So there is always a risk of rajas or tamas taking over, even in a sattvic person. Another pitfall of this is that sattva is not free from ego. Sattva has its own ego. When the person asserts that I go to bed early, I get up early, I eat only healthy food, I don't care for how the food tastes, I care for what is healthy. I'm not greedy. I eat only as much as I need, not more than that. Even if I like something, I don't need any luxury. I can sleep on a hard bed. I don't mind any type of work. I'm ready to sweep the floor. I'm ready to clean the toilets anywhere. Uh, I do all my work by myself. I don't need anybody's help. Now, when the person says any such things, uh, which may be all perfectly true for a sattvic person, what he's trying to sort of exhibit, make known in subtle ways sometimes, not all the time, sometimes to some people, but then he's getting some egoistic satisfaction from it. And if anybody praises him for all this, he enjoys that admiration. That also is an expression of the ego. So, sattva is not really free from ego, but all the same, between among these three, it is the highest type of element in our personality. And since it involves some sort of so-called sacrifice, actually it's not really sacrifice, because sacrifice means giving up something uh, which is good for the sake of something which is not so good. That would be a sacrifice. Here the person has given up things which give only temporary happiness for the sake of things which bring lasting happiness, and therefore it's not really a sacrifice, it is enlightened action. uh, but all this enlightened action involves difficulties, hardships, obstacles, and seemingly giving up things which most people need, and this person may not be entirely above those. And therefore, initially, it may sound bitter. But since he's on the right track, eventually the fruit is sweet. So this is just the opposite of rajas. Rajasic achievements are bitter to, sorry, are sweet to start with, but eventually turn bitter. The sattvic effort and achievement are bitter to start with, but eventually the fruit is sweet. The sattvic person is not as active as a rajasic person. He, uh, his activity is moderate in nature. And sometimes it may uh, go towards what is called sattvic quietude. He may be doing very little. But then there is not just visible work, there's also invisible work on the path of yoga. There's outer work and there's inner work. Maybe this person is spending more time on inner work. And we all have different types of nature, and that's why the Gita has given us the freedom to walk the type of path that is most suited to our temperament. And that freedom, in fact, widens in the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, which means that each person can carve out his or her own path depending upon the person's inclinations, temperament, capacity, and circumstances. And in any type of circumstances, in any type of life, there's always scope for practice of yoga. And that is what Sri Aurobindo calls, all life is yoga, which means that all life gives us an opportunity for the practice of yoga. So this person may choose the type of path which involves more of inner churning than outer visible work. And therefore, he may appear to be not doing much. This sattvic quietude can superficially resemble tamasic inertia. Then, how do we distinguish between the two? The distinction would be in the way the person feels. A sattvic person is a happy, contented soul. A tamasic person is an unhappy, discontented soul, not really doing anything hard to overcome that discontent, blaming somebody, always finding a scapegoat, blaming fate, blaming the society, and so on for his poor condition. But so he's basically a discontented and unhappy person. The second difference would be that the sattvic person is full of love and compassion for others, whereas the tamasic person is completely absorbed in himself. And that reminds me of what Bertrand Russell has uh, concluded in his book, The Secret of Happiness. It's 150 or 200 pages in which, based purely on logical arguments, he finally has come to the conclusion that the ultimate secret of happiness is overcoming chronic self absorption, thinking beyond your little self, thinking of others. That is what the sattvic person is doing, and that is exactly what the tamasic person is not doing. Now, why did Bertrand Russell need 200 pages to come to this conclusion? Because he was basically an atheist. He did not believe in the divine, and therefore he depended on his intellect. So, using the intellect to arrive at any conclusion, any reasonable conclusion, is a hard and laborious task. It involves uh, hard work, rational analysis, which has its pitfalls, and therefore the person uh, goes on taking into account more and more factors in this analysis and still does not reach a very definitive conclusion. And that's why he needed that much space. Whereas if you look at it from the spiritual point of view, it's also is simple. The same thing that ego is not the highest part of the being, that has a temporary purpose in life, yes, but then eventually this ego has to be transcended so that we can start working more and more, not in light of the ordinary ego, but in the light of, at the most, an enlightened ego, which is enlightened by the soul. So when the soul starts enlightening the ego and therefore also enlightening the body, the emotional part of the being and the intellect, when that starts happening, then the person starts getting more happy, because then it is the delight of the soul, the self-existent delight of the soul, that starts getting reflected in his personality. So uh, the conclusion remains the same, that the secret of happiness is overcoming chronic self-absorption, and that is what the sattvic person has done and the tamasic person has not done. And therefore, although sometimes superficially sattvic quietude may resemble tamasic inertia, but the tamasic person is unhappy and is absorbed in himself, whereas the sattvic person is a happy, contented soul and is not absorbed in himself. He is working for others because he has love and compassion for others. The Gita has also talked about uh, these gunas in relation to food. And it says that the tamasic person likes to take, has a liking for stale, unhealthy food, whereas the Rajasic person has a taste for food that is spicy and pungent and gives a a good sensory sort of stimulation. And the sattvic person likes to take healthy, soft, succulent food, fruits, etc. Now, this has been sometimes expanded. In fact, usually it is expanded. And to some extent, that is also true to talk about tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic foods. To some extent, it is true that certain types of foods promote tamas, some others promote rajas, and some others promote sattva. So it applies to foods as well. But then, what is more important is the nature of the individual and therefore what he likes, rather than the foods in themselves, the chemical composition of the food in itself necessarily determining what it will promote. And one thing which certainly is true is that any food, even the so called sattvic food, turns tamasic if it is taken out of greed in a very large quantity. So it's not just the food, it is also the attitude with which is taken, which determines what it will do, what it will promote in us, tamas, rajas, or sattva. And we can understand why the Gita has not gone into these foods individually and just left it at who will like what type of a food. Because it's a tamasic person is basically ignorant and he's lazy. Therefore, he does not know what is healthy, and unhealthy foods tend to be more palatable. Therefore, he may choose what is unhealthy, although it is palatable. So, because of his ignorance. Secondly, he's lazy. Because he's lazy, he would not like to put in effort to procure food, cook food again and again, and therefore he will not mind even stale food. So, perhaps that is what explains why he likes stale food and unhealthy food. The Rajasic person, for his desire and ambitions, with that would be associated liking for also food that stimulates the senses, that stimulates uh, the type of dynamism that he has, and that's why he has a taste for sharp, spicy, pungent, palatable foods, non-vegetarian food, and so on. Whereas the sattvic person, because he is sattva is the principle of knowledge and harmony, this person would like food which is healthy, food which tastes sweet, soft, juicy, because these are the types of elements that also gel well with his personality. So that is what explains why a person has different types of taste in relation to food. Now let's see what actually works in practice in the ordinary world. While I mean it is desirable to move from tamas to rajas and from rajas to sattva, that is what the path of yoga is about. And although we may be dominated by one of these, it is possible to change. If it were fixed, it might be fixed at birth. And that is why we find that children, right from the beginning, have a different type of personality. But life, if it has to be used usefully, and that is what the path of yoga is about, if it fulfills the purpose of life, the person will be moving consciously or unconsciously from tamas to rajas and from rajas to sattva. But what works in practice in the world is, in fact, a combination of sattva and rajas. While sattva is very good, some amount of rajas is also necessary, particularly, as I was saying, for leaders, rulers, administrators. Even if they do not have too much of rajas, at least they have to pretend sometimes that they have rajas. So, at least as a like an actor, they have to show that. Otherwise, very often they will not be able to uh, get the work done. So that has to be done not out of uh, superiority complex, not out of egoistic satisfaction, not because the person enjoys control over others, but because that is his duty. That is a part of his duty. And so long as basic love and compassion is there, the person will find that the the basic competence is there and the goodwill is there, in spite of an occasional show, when necessary, for the right reasons, to the right extent, a display of rajas. In spite of that, uh, he will command, not demand, but command a great deal of respect from people uh, who are dependent on him, or whose ruler or boss he happens to be. So, a certain amount of combination of this uh, sattva and rajas is a necessity in the real world. But so far as his personal sadhana is concerned, the person should always be moving from tamas to rajas and from rajas to sattva. And not only that, the ultimate goal in terms of the Gita is going beyond all the three gunas. That's what is called the Trigunatit. Now, to understand why we should go beyond the three gunas is easy, because we saw that sattva also has its pitfalls, and there's also a sattvic ego, and therefore it is should be it is necessary to go even beyond the three if one has to achieve the type of perfection that is the goal in yoga. To understand what going beyond the three guna means, let me end with a story. Once there was a road being built, and there were a large number of workers breaking stones. And somebody, well, not actually somebody, the king who was taking around incognito, started asking them what they are doing. When he asked one worker, "What are you doing?" he said, "I'm breaking stones because I have to make a living." Now, this reflects tamas. Basically, working was absolutely necessary to fill the tummy. Then he asked the second worker, "What are you doing?" The second one said, "I'm breaking stones because a road is under construction from A to B." Now, this person has some rajas because he feels I'm involved in an activity. I'm proud of being involved in this activity because it will lead to a certain result. I'm contributing to a certain achievement. I'll be a contributor to the road that will be built to an accomplishment that is a road connecting A and B. Then he asked one more worker, "What are you doing?" He said, I'm breaking stones because a road is being built to connect point A and point B. And as a result, what will happen is that earlier, whatever had to be sent from A to B had to be, or B to A, had to be carried by donkeys. Now the poor animals will be spared because this load can go by vehicles. And since a lot more transport will be possible, the economy of the region will also improve. So this person is thinking in terms of the uh, comfort which the donkeys will get, and the improvement in that region, the economy will develop. So he's looking upon himself as someone who is contributing to the road, which will lead to these desirable results, which he's very happy about. Suppose there's a person was who had gone all beyond all the three gunas. What would that person have said? That person would have said the same things which the sattvic person said, but added something more. I'm breaking stones because a road is under construction, which will connect point A and B, and then the donkeys won't have to carry the loads. They'll be spared from all this, and the economy of the region will improve. But then he would have added one more thing. He would have said, I'm very privileged to be an instrument of the divine, to be an instrument of God. Be given this opportunity to do this work. Now, what difference will it make in practice? The difference that will make in practice is that this person will do a better job. He'll do it more happily. And if after the road has been constructed, suppose an earthquake hits that same region and this road is all broken, this person will still not be disappointed because he was not attached to the outcome. What this person would do is now engage himself in relief and rehabilitation work and once again say, I'm privileged that the divine has chosen me to engage in this rehabilitation work. So that would be the difference. That would be the person who has gone beyond the three gunas. So with this, I end here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them up.
Namaste, sir. A pleasure
Namaste.
to listen
Namaste,
to
Bali
you.
Yogi ji.
Very, very special to listen to you and your comment on overcoming chronic self-absorption. I think that is a mantra to be taken by all of us in our life because there's such self-absorption. And again, to hear that beautiful story of the three gunas through you today, I think it made it even better for me. The question I have, sir, is these concepts are so elevating. At times, I wonder if these concepts are utopian, because when we live on this planet, when we live with fellow human beings, the struggle to move from tamasic to rajasic to sattvic seems a huge load at times for many sadhakas. What would your suggestions be? What could the person do practically to actually manifest this dynamic transformation? Because yoga is transformation and transcendence. What could we actually do? I think this is a challenge that, as a spiritual guide for many people, I often feel, how can I help them make this transformation from tamasika to rajasika to sattvika, and then ultimately transcend it into the nirguna? Any thoughts and guidelines from you would be highly appreciated, sir.
Well, as you were asking the question, a few things occurred to me, and I can share them with you and everybody there. Firstly, that we should not be obsessed with our progress or with the goal. We should just go on doing what we are supposed to do. The progress will take care of itself, because doing what we are doing in the spirit of yoga itself brings great joy. And we should be just satisfied with that instead of worrying about the degree of progress, the pace of progress, how long it will take to reach the goal, and so on. The uh, second thing is that although I mean today the world is such that this progress becomes difficult, uh, but it is not necessarily going to be always so, because the consciousness is evolving. And about that, Sri Aurobindo and the mother talked about 100 years ago at length, and not only gave us the hope that world will change, but in fact gave us the certitude. And the certitude was based not on wishful thinking, but on deeper truths of existence. Firstly, the trend in evolution so far from matter to life, from life to mind, and then finally, so far, man, who is only a transitional being. If this trend continues, we can expect the consciousness to further rise up, and there will come a tipping point when there will be sufficient number of people in the world who will be love driven rather than ego driven. And that is the point at which the world's affairs will be conducted from a different plane of consciousness, and that is what will change the world. So that is a certitude they have given. And then that vision they had that, yes, this is sure to happen. And the only thing is whether it will happen slowly as a result of only the natural process of evolution, or whether we as human beings will accelerate it by contributing to it. That is the only question. But then human beings are also contributing to it, because these two are also not entirely separate. Because if you look at it, if that is the trend of evolution, as a result of even the natural process, more and more children will be born who will have this type of tendencies from early life. And perceptive observers today, about 100 years after Sri Aurobindo and mother talked about it, are finding that all these things are true. There are more and more youngsters who are looking beyond their personal self. More and more youngsters who are, apart from looking for a career, also are looking for meaning in life. And more people are turning towards things which are love driven, which means which are talking in terms of union rather than division and separation. And one of those trends is uh, saying that we are not organized, we are not affiliated to any organized religion, but we are spiritual. We believe in a higher power, but we don't want all those rituals and ceremonies associated with the religions. Now, all these are trends which are suggestive that we are moving towards a better world, and therefore there is hope that it will not always remain so, and therefore these ideas are not necessarily utopian, and they are futuristic, and they are a little unrealistic today, but they're not a fantasy which sort of is only theoretical or academic.
Thank you so much, sir. That is a beautiful blessing to hear those words. And may your blessing always be with us.
And Dr. Leena has raised her hand. Dr. Leena, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, my question is that I'm working as a faculty in a law college, and I'm doing social service also in my legal aid clinic of our college. Uh, I'm not able to make out whether this is the real purpose of life, working for the society, or is it doing the prayers. So, uh, out of the two, which I will focus more upon.
Your question reflects a common uh, idea that has made deep inroads into the Indian psyche over the last 1000 years, that worldly life and spiritual life are two different things altogether. You think that either I can work for the society or I can spend time on prayer. Prayer is spirituality, working for the society is not spirituality. Now, this is the type of dichotomy that has developed. Um, while prayer and meditation and all those practices can help, and they would perhaps also help in uh, improving, bringing spirituality into our everyday life, the fact is that spirituality can be brought into everyday life, and that type of a dichotomy does not exist. I mean, say to take your work as a teacher. Now, this work itself can be done in so many different ways. And when you do it as an instrument of the divine and do it as a privilege that has been given to you, uh, so that you are not linking what you get out of it with what you are putting into it, and not insisting on a particular outcome. When you are looking beyond the syllabus, when you are taking care of the some of the psychological issues and other issues of students, acting as an informal counselor, when you're doing all those things, you are bringing spirituality into your everyday life. Or say a person who's a practicing lawyer. Now, like medicine and teaching, law has also been considered a noble profession, because after all, who goes to a lawyer who is in difficulty? And the lawyer helps him secure justice. So, in that sense, law is also a noble profession. Now, the extent to which the person uses this profession as a noble profession, he's also bringing spirituality into his life. So, spirituality can be brought into any type of life, any type of work that we do, and therefore, working for the society or doing work as a teacher or as a lawyer uh, is not divorced from spirituality. Prayer and meditation and those quietistic practices, which we normally associate with religion and spirituality, they can help us with our inner churning, which means that during that is the time when we can contemplate, uh, have I done the best that I could do? Were there some situations today where I took a decision which I can be proud of? Were there some situations in which I made a decision which now I feel ashamed about? Maybe next time I'll not make a similar mistake in similar circumstances, do better. It is that type of churning that can happen during those quiet periods. And that is what I was talking about, inner work. The balance between inner and work and outer work can change, can be different. But hardly anybody can say that only inner work is spirituality and outer work is cannot be spiritual. Spirituality can be brought into all aspects of our ordinary everyday life, irrespective of what work we are doing.
Thank you, sir.
Manan has a question. Manan, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Namaste, Bhaiya.
Namaste, Manan.
Gratitude for a nice presentation. My question is on yoga of self perfection and key elements of integral personality uh, that the mother and Sri Aurobindo have talked about, might have mentioned, to expedite conscious leap in evolution. Um, and move on to the next stage. And perhaps you could also reflect a bit on the changes that you have yourself witnessed in your own long journey as a counselor. Thank you.
Well, to some extent, I mean, your questions have been answered in the previous questions that I was answering, in the sense that the yoga is a journey towards self perfection, but it's a journey. which means we don't have to be obsessed with the goal. The elements or the steps into which this journey towards self-perfection can be broken is improvement. So every bit of improvement is taking us towards perfection. And improvement we have to be uh, conscious of. We also have to be vigilant about it. Vigilant in the sense, vigilant that we do not do something which is violating the voice of our soul. And also vigilant in the positive direction, as the mother said. That's another type of vigilance. Do not lose an opportunity to do something which is right. Not doing it may not be necessarily wrong in itself, in the ordinary sense. But if you lose that opportunity, that also is not being vigilant enough to practice yoga. So both types of vigilance are necessary, and that will accelerate the journey towards self-perfection of the individual. And it is ultimately the individuals who constitute the society. So more the individuals, the more progress they are making, the greater will be the journey towards that tipping point where we'll have enough number of people who will be able to then determine the way the world is run. And about the key elements of integral personality, well, the key elements of the individual, of course, the terminology apart are basically uh, the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect, the physical, vital, and the mental, in Sri Aurobindo's terminology. And then the three being uh, controlled by the ego. And then behind all this is the soul. And it is the barrier between the soul and what is on the surface, that the ego and these three basic tools. These are tools or instruments, the body, mind, and the intellect. So these three tools, which are being regulated by the ego, between these and the soul, there's a barrier. To weaken that barrier progressively is what yoga is about, to which inner as well as outer work can both contribute. Inner work, which improves the outer work, and outer work, which gives us the opportunity to see how much progress we have actually made, and also opportunities for the mistakes that we make. If we do nothing, we can make no mistakes. So the mistakes that we make, they also become an opportunity to reflect, to go through that inner churning, which then helps in improving the next time. So both are complementary, the inner work and the outer work. Any more questions? Yes, I can see one more hand raised. Sanjay Jain.
Sanjay, please.
Hello, sir. Sir, my question is to make the progress from tamas to rajas to sattva, is it important to first understand what is your dominant guna is? And if so, then is there a template or is there some kind of a, method to determine what is your dominant guna is?
Yes, there are methods to determine that. Of course, one can judge from the type of uh, personality they give us, the type of work we engage in, the motives with which we engage in the work, and so on. That gives us some indication. But if one wants a little more objective evaluation, then there are questionnaires available. I'm sure there'll be many on the internet, but at least one place where I came across one such questionnaire was in a book by David Frawley. I think the book is Yoga and the Mind or something like that. In that, he has given a questionnaire to assess the degree of sattva, rajas, and tamas in an individual.
Okay, thanks. And sir, is then once you understand what is your dominant guna, so the path is always to move from say tamas to rajas to sattva, or the goal should be what are the elements of sattva, and that's where you should aim for.
Well, I mean, that is something you see, which where too much of using too much of the intellect becomes a barrier rather than a support. One can intuitively and instinctively know which is the better thing to do, which is the better way to move, and just keep moving in that direction. And the change in the personality and the proportion of these three elements will keep changing. The results will take care of themselves. Basically, we just keep doing what we think is the better thing to do.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Basically, three elements you see, which ultimately all this sadhana boils down to is one is making the right choices, and the best soul is given to us not by the intellect, but by the inner voice which comes from the soul. The second element is the attitude with which we do our work. Do it in the spirit of karma yoga, as given in the Gita. as an instrument of the divine without being attached to the fruit. Not that you don't expect a fruit, but you're not insisting on it, you're not attached to it, so that if the fruit turns out to be, or the outcome turns out to be opposite of what one had calculated, one is not affected. You still continue, the faith is not shaken, you continue on the path and you continue working. So you're not emotionally upset by that. So that sort of equanimity. And the third element is one should not feel that just because I'm doing everything right, I'm doing my work with the right attitude, I'm listening to the voice of my soul, I'll be always a happy person, I'll get everything I want. In fact, that should not be the expectation. One does not become immune to all the traumatic events and difficulties of life. The only thing is, use those also as an opportunity. Treat them as a gift from the divine, so that they have been given, and they have been given to me in this much amount or this much of it, because the divine knows that I can use them properly. So in fact, the more you can do, the more you may get sometimes. So treat it in that way, accept it with prasad buddhi, as it said, take it as prasad from the divine, and then see how is it that this also can be an opportunity. And it's not, again, it can be done intuitively, because difficulties and problems and traumatic events are great opportunities, because only when we find that we are helpless, that we think of the one for whom everything is easy, nothing is impossible. You think of that, because we ourselves find that with our human limitations, we find ourselves helpless. So you turn to the one who has no limitations, who can do everything, for whom everything is easy. So that takes you closer to the divine. Second thing that happens is that you realize that even in that difficult situation, there are always some people around you who are helpful to you and bring you out of that difficulty. So you realize that, yes, there is beauty in the world. There's so much love and compassion in the world. And these people have helped me. I should not only help them, but if I find somebody else in a similar situation in future, I should also become helpful like these people. So, that uh, creates a sense of love and oneness and intimacy, which is a part of this. So that also misfortune and difficult times can bring us, which can shake up, sort of bring us out of our complacency and self-sufficiency and being sort of that I'm completely self-reliant. It has can bring us out of that. So that itself is a big step, connects us with others. So greater connectivity, which reflects a deeper spiritual truth, because at the spiritual level, we are all connected. We are all one. It's only superficially that we are all separate. The boundaries of our skin are not the final boundaries. When it comes to the universal spirit, that is universal in nature, and we are just one condensation or a manifestation of that. So in that sense, we are all interrelated. So that interrelatedness becomes meaningful to us when we go through a difficulty, somebody helps us and we help somebody in their difficulty. So that type of a personality grows. So difficulties are also given to us with a purpose. And if they did not come at all, if all were going well, probably chances are we'll get so uh, absorbed in all types of luxury and so-called wine, women, and music, that we'll forget what the true purpose of life is. So we need both. We need some difficulties so that we can turn to the divine. We also need some good things to happen in life, so that we can accept what we get with gratitude. That gratitude, not feeling that it's all because of my efforts, because it seldom is. It's usually disproportionate, the extra that we receive, which we call good fortune. And then we see that if I have received this much in excess, what is it that I can do to share it with those who do not have it but need it? So good fortune is also an opportunity. Misfortune is an opportunity. And we need both. We need good fortune so that we can share and we feel life worth living. Misfortune so that we do not get lost, we do not forget the purpose of life. And if we get only misfortune, then we would get so depressed that we might feel like committing suicide. So both are needed, and that is why we get both, and use both of them for spiritual growth. So using all the ups and downs of life properly, working in the spirit of karma yoga, and making the right choices in the course of the day, or whenever a major choice or minor choice has to be made, making it primarily on the basis of the inner voice, that voice coming from the soul, rather than on the basis of what appears tempting to the mind, or what appears rational from the point of view of least risk and maximum benefit. That is the type of analysis the intellect goes into. So that analysis will may be misguiding. Temptation may also be misguiding, which the inner voice coming from the soul, which gives us the genuine and most authentic choice. So these are the three basic elements: making choices, how we work, and how we use the ups and downs of life.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
So there are no more questions in chat. If anyone has any question, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
So if there are no more questions, then you may wind up the session.
So yeah, no more questions. Thank you for the beautiful session. It was lovely hearing you today. So we'll end our session with a moment of silence, and thank you everyone for joining today evening on this beautiful evening. Thank you.